You know that specific feeling when you walk past a typical middle school classroom and just look through that little rectangular window in the door?
Oh, yeah. It's a profoundly comforting visual,
Yeah.
honestly.
Because you see the kids sitting quietly at their desks, they're in neat little rows, pencils are moving, the teacher is up at the whiteboard pointing to an equation. It looks like this well-oiled machine.
Exactly. We see the quiet compliance, the heads down, and we instinctively code that as cognitive engagement. We just assume they're doing the mental work of learning.
But then you actually look at the data, and suddenly that little window feels more like, I don't know, a two-way mirror. You realize you're looking at an illusion.
Total illusion, yeah.
Because in a room of 30 kids, the research shows that up to 24 of them are just entirely mentally checked out. So, welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We are unpacking this massive stack of educational research today, specifically 15 years of observational data by Dr. Peter Liljedahl.
Which is just fascinating stuff.
It really is. Our mission today is to deconstruct what researchers call the non-thinking classroom. We want to figure out what is actually happening in these math classes and why our teaching methods have accidentally engineered an environment where actual thinking is practically non-existent.
And this contrast is wild. The gap between what teachers genuinely believe is happening and the reality of the student experience,
Yeah.
it totally reframes human behavior. Because, this isn't just about middle school math.
Right. It's about how we all adapt to systems. But I have to challenge that 80% statistic right out of the gate.
Yeah.
Because I've sat in those classrooms. I've watched kids do the worksheets, fill out the boxes, get the right answers. It feels impossible that 24 out of 30 kids aren't thinking.
I know, it sounds crazy. But producing work and engaging in actual cognitive labor are two entirely different mechanisms. Like, let's look at the bedrock of traditional instruction. It's a model called I do, we do, you do.
Ah, yes. The classic format.
Right. The teacher stands at the board and demonstrates a problem. That's the I do. Then the class works through a similar problem together.
Yeah.
The we do. And finally, the teacher hands out a worksheet for independent practice.
The you do part. You sit at your desk and practice what you literally just watched.
Exactly. But the fatal flaw there is the assumption that during that independent practice, students are actually grappling with the concepts. The teacher assumes they're thinking deeply about the underlying logic. But the data reveals something pretty shocking.
Okay, brace yourselves for this one.
In a typical one-hour math lesson structured this way, only 8 to 12 minutes actually involve real, independent cognitive work from the students.
Wait, 8 to 12 minutes out of an entire hour.
Yes. The rest of the time is just the illusion of learning. And when students aren't required to think, math just devolves into this exercise of rote procedural mimicry.
Like they're just following a highly specific recipe without knowing what the ingredients actually do.
Precisely. And their mathematical knowledge becomes incredibly fragile. It shatters the second a problem's parameters change even slightly.
Yeah, if you just memorize the recipe, the second someone asks you to bake it at a different temperature, the whole dish is ruined. You don't understand the chemistry of baking.
Right. So if a teacher shows them how to find the volume of a pyramid using a formula, the students can copy those steps and plug in the numbers all day. But if the test gives them the total volume and asks for a missing base dimension, they completely freeze.
Because they can't work backward.
Exactly. They never thought about what the formula represents. They just followed the physical steps.
It's honestly exactly like going to the gym, paying a personal trainer, and then just standing there watching the trainer lift all the heavy weights. You're sweating, you hear the clanking metal, but you wonder why you aren't getting stronger.
That is a perfect analogy. The cognitive load, the actual neurological strain of struggling with a problem, remains entirely on the teacher's shoulders during that demonstration. The student is rarely carrying that weight.
Okay, so if only 8 minutes of a 1-hour class are spent actually lifting those cognitive weights, we have to talk about the other 48 minutes. If they aren't thinking, what on earth are they doing?
Well, Dr. Liljedahl breaks down the specific behaviors students use. He calls them studenting behaviors. These are actions that convincingly mimic learning, but are actually designed to mask a complete lack of engagement.
Which is so relatable. Reading this taxonomy felt like someone secretly recorded my own middle school experience.
I think we all recognize them. There are 4 distinct behaviors. The first one is mimicking.
Right. The kids who immediately put their heads down and start writing the second the worksheet drops.
Yes, and it's the most deceptive behavior because it produces the desired artifact, right?
Mm.
A completed worksheet with correct answers. They just replicate the teacher's steps to get to the finish line without any grasp of the logic.
Like number plucking in word problems. You get a paragraph about a train leaving Chicago at 60 miles per hour carrying 40 crates of apples, and the mimicking student doesn't even read it.
No, not at all. They just scan the text, pluck out the numbers 60 and 40, look at the board, see that the teacher multiplied, and just multiply 60 by 40.
It's just pattern matching. They completely bypass the actual cognitive demand. It produces a correct answer, so the teacher's happy, but zero sense-making has occurred.
Exactly. Now, the second behavior is stalling. This is for the kids who don't immediately dive into mimicking.
Oh, stalling. This one hits close to home.
Stalling is all those subtle, often subconscious avoidance tactics to delay the start of thinking. The moment independent work begins, a student suddenly realizes, oh, my pencil needs sharpening.
Then they need water. Then they need to color code their highlighters.
Right. Or they ask the teacher to repeat the instructions that were just given perfectly clearly.
Yeah.
It looks like standard procrastination, but the neuroscience here is fascinating.
Yeah, the sources talked about how it's actually a biological response, right?
It is. It's tied to executive functioning and the adolescent nervous system.
Mm.
Transitioning from watching the teacher do the work to actually doing it yourself is physiologically uncomfortable.
Because it's a sudden spike in cognitive demand.
Exactly. To an adolescent brain, that demand feels incredibly risky. So stalling is a regulatory mechanism. It pushes off that feeling of discomfort.
But, eventually the pencil is sharp, the stalling has an expiration date.
Yes, and that is the pivot point. When stalling is no longer viable because the teacher is walking down the aisle, students often transition to the third behavior, which is faking.
Oh, faking is an entirely different level of performance art.
Truly, a stalling student is delaying the start line. A faking student has no intention of ever crossing the start line. They just want to survive the class, period.
They prioritize the appearance of compliance over actually learning anything. You'll see them flipping pages with this deeply furrowed brow.
Staring intensely at a blank piece of paper, nodding to themselves.
Yes. When I read this, I instantly connected it to adult corporate behavior. It is literally the exact same mechanism as an office worker aggressively typing a meaningless email just to look busy when the boss walks by.
That's exactly what it is. It's performative compliance. You're expending actual energy, not on the work, but on constructing the illusion that you were doing the work.
Right. It's pure impression management to avoid getting called out. Which leaves us with the final and definitely the most overt behavior, withdrawing.
Yes. Withdrawing is complete, unabashed non-engagement. These students opt out entirely. They put their head down on the desk, stare at the ceiling, or just refuse to open their backpack.
And the instinct is always to label that kid as rebellious or defiant. But the research paints a much more vulnerable picture, doesn't it?
It does. It's a huge shift in perspective. Withdrawing usually happens when the floor of the task is too high.
Meaning the minimum required knowledge just to get started.
Exactly. If a student lacks that foundational knowledge, the task is completely inaccessible. They literally cannot start. And when faced with a task beyond their capability, shutting down is a highly effective emotional protection mechanism.
Because why attempt it? Fail visibly and confirm this fear that you aren't smart enough when you can just refuse to play the game.
Exactly. It allows the student to maintain their ego. They tell themselves, I didn't fail because I couldn't do it. I failed because I chose not to try.
Wow. And this brings us to a major pivot in how we need to view this entire dynamic. Because the default instinct for so many of us, parents, managers, teachers, is to blame the individual. We say, kids today are lazy. They have no attention span.
But we have to look at the system. If an office worker fakes typing, we blame a toxic corporate culture that punishes looking idle. We have to apply that same systemic lens to the classroom.
So these behaviors, mimicking, stalling, faking, withdrawing, they aren't just lazy kids.
No. They are the direct result of the institutional norms and the physical architecture of the traditional classroom. We've literally built an environment that begs students to avoid thinking.
Okay, let's break down that architecture because this blew my mind. Starting with the physical space. You walk into a normal math class, you see horizontal individual desks. How does furniture drive non-thinking?
Well, sitting in rows of individual horizontal desks creates a profound sense of anonymity. When you're in the third row, looking at the back of someone's head, you feel this massive psychological distance from the teacher.
And your workspace is flat on your desk. It's completely private.
And privacy is the ultimate shield for the fakers and the stallers. Because the work is horizontal, it is incredibly easy to fake. For a teacher to verify if you're thinking, they have to physically walk over, invade your personal space, and look down at your paper.
So the architecture itself creates a physical barrier to accountability. And then you add the medium we ask them to use, right? Pen or pencil in a notebook.
This was the most fascinating psychological insight,
The
Tuli.
permanence of it.
Yes, the high risk of being wrong.
Think about the social and emotional landscape of a middle schooler. It's highly volatile. The fear of peer judgment is at an all-time high. And now we ask them to explore complex math concepts in a permanent medium.
Right, when you write in pen, or even pencil, which leaves eraser smudges, your mistakes become a permanent visual record of your failure right there on the page. The emotional stakes of just attempting a problem are artificially sky high. The perceived risk is so huge that it triggers the brain's freeze or flight responses.
Which is exactly what we're seeing when they stall or withdraw. They're terrified by the permanence of a potential mistake.
Absolutely. So you have horizontal desks and permanent notebooks creating fear and hiding. But then we layer on the pedagogical architecture.
Let's ground that term for everyone. When you say pedagogical architecture, you mean the actual instructional steps the teacher forces them to follow.
Right, the sequence of how information is delivered. That I do, we do, you do model is arguably the biggest driver of non-thinking, because the teacher provides the roadmap immediately.
They demonstrate the flawless procedure before the kids even have to grapple with the concept.
Exactly. So the student's cognitive load is removed by design. They know the system. They know that if they stall long enough, the teacher's own discomfort with silence will kick in.
So the teacher will eventually walk over and say, okay, here's your first step.
Yes. The system explicitly teaches them that thinking is optional. If you just wait, the adult in the room will always do the thinking for you.
This fundamentally shifts how I view compliance, because we've essentially built a system where keeping your head down, mimicking the steps, and hiding mistakes is the smartest, safest play.
It's an environment designed for self-preservation, not intellectual exploration. And this is Dr. Lojadal's transformative insight. We have to stop viewing these behaviors as symptoms of unmotivated students.
They are highly intelligent, highly adaptive responses to a flawed design.
Exactly. They're just reading the room. They're surviving the hour with the least amount of friction and the lowest emotional risk. Human beings are biologically wired to conserve energy.
Right. If cognitive labor isn't strictly required to survive the environment, the brain just won't expend it. The students aren't failing the system is failing them.
And we carry this conditioning with us long after middle school. These habits become deeply ingrained survival skills.
Oh, totally. Think about the last time you, the listener, had to learn a genuinely complex new skill for your job, or sat through a mandatory corporate training. Were you actually engaging in productive struggle?
Were you testing hypotheses and risking looking foolish in front of your peers?
Or were you just faking it to get to the end of the hour? Were you that office worker aggressively typing a graft email just to look busy?
It is a sobering reflection. When an environment prioritizes compliance and quietness over the messy process of true sense-making, we engineer thinking right out of the room.
Okay, we have covered incredible ground today. We looked at that rectangular window in the door, the illusion of the quiet classroom. We broke down the gap between expectation and reality, those meager 8 minutes of cognitive work.
And we explored the taxonomy,
Yeah.
mimicking, stalling, faking, withdrawing.
Right. And we realized that the physical desks, the permanent ink, and the instructional spoon-feeding dictate these behaviors. But the research does offer a radically effective structural solution, doesn't it?
It does. If the environment dictates the behavior, then changing the behavior requires changing the environment. And the solution is vertical non-permanent surfaces.
It sounds so simple, but the data is undeniable.
Getting students out of their chairs and changing the physical orientation of the work changes everything. When you have students stand up and work in randomized groups on whiteboards or glass windows, you completely shatter the anonymity of the horizontal desk.
Because it's vertical and public, you cannot fake being busy when your totally blank whiteboard is facing the center of the room for everyone to see.
The accountability becomes ambient. But the true magic is the non-permanence of the dry erase marker. A whiteboard inherently communicates that mistakes are temporary.
It lowers the emotional risk to almost zero. It's psychologically safe to attempt a problem, be entirely wrong, and just wipe it away with your hand.
It forces active collaborative thinking by removing the fear of a permanent record of failure. It turns a space of self-preservation into a space of actual exploration.
Because a physical space that demands perfection will always produce performance rather than learning.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a question to chew on. Look around your own workspace right now. Think about the physical and cultural environment where you expect your team or your kids or even yourself to do your best thinking. Is that environment designed to make it explicitly safe to erase your mistakes and think out loud? Or is it perfectly designed to encourage faking? The next time you look through that rectangular window in the door, whether it's a classroom or boardroom look beneath the quiet surface, ask yourself who is actually doing the heavy lifting. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden mechanics of learning. We'll catch you next time.